Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the Smurl House. In August of 1973, the Smurl family had moved into a new home in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, but things quickly took quite a dark turn. The family began to claim that their new home was possessed by some sort of demon that caused loud noises and bad odors, and that whatever this entity was, it was doing some really violent things to the family, as well as to their pet dog. Gotta draw a line somewhere. This went on for years before they decided to call in the pros. Of course, Ed and Lorraine were on the case. According to Ed, there was a demon that inhabited the home and it was very powerful. It had the ability to shake mirrors and other items of furniture, and they began trying to persuade it to leave by playing religious music and praying. Apparently the Warrens, while in the home, witnessed a drop in temperature, which was followed by the formation of a sort of dark mass. There was another instance where they claimed they saw the demon leave a message on a mirror that read, quote, "Get out." In our number 9 spot today, we have the Ouija board. This story is one that Ed Warren told when he was trying to set an example of how things of the occult and the supernatural certainly are not for amateurs or for the faint of heart. He used this story of a girl who was playing with a Ouija board, you know how all good supernatural stories start. She asked for proof of a spirit presence and she got a lot more than she bargained for. Warren said, quote, "She got this proof with 2 days and 2 nights of hell." Apparently it started off with the manifestation of a sort of animal form walking on her bed. This then turned physical, and whatever this entity was left her with some bruises. It is said that thankfully the mother in the home saw what was happening and she took action. She not only prayed by the girl's bedside, but she also sprinkled holy water. There was a 2-day vigil in which everyone tried to rid the girl of this demonic presence that she had summoned, and thankfully it is said to have worked. In our number 8 spot today, we have Annabelle. Many of us are likely quite familiar with Annabelle due to the movies made about the haunted doll, but as it turns out they are truly more than just movies, as the real story is said to have taken place in the 1960s. I always thought that Annabelle was kind of like a Chucky ripoff, but it turns out it is way more sinister than that. This is at least when Ed and Lorraine began to get involved with the doll. In 1968, 2 roommates claimed that a Raggedy Ann doll that was gifted to one of them by their mother had become possessed by the spirit of a young girl named Annabelle Higgins. After further investigation by the pair, the Warrens explained that the doll was being manipulated by an inhuman presence, and they knew that the roommates would not be able to keep the doll without fearing for their safety. This is what led to the pair taking the doll and placing it in their occult museum, and this is the story that inspired the hit movie. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Donovan family. In the early 1970s, the Warrens were called to the home of the Donovan family, and when they arrived, they found them all terrified. They witnessed loud pounding and other inhuman noises coming from inside of the walls, the wallpaper was peeling, and the water was running red. The Warrens began their investigation, and this included asking them questions to try and find out if there was a source of the haunting, such as a recently passed away family member or some kind of new secondhand item. Through this questioning, it was revealed that one member of the family had used a Ouija board and ended up contacting someone who had died in the neighborhood 10 years earlier. The Warrens knew that it was time for them to call a priest because they believed that the entity that had been reached through the Ouija board was actually a demon just posing as the person who had passed away. Following an exorcism, it is said that the things in the home slowly returned to normal, but the events stayed with the entire family. One member who witnessed the hauntings and the exorcism said, quote, "I, nor anyone else in my family, have ever before witnessed anything so weird and terrifying." In our number 6 spot today, we have the Borley Church. This is the story that is said to be the inspiration for the terrifying movie The Nun, so buckle up. The story takes place when the Warrens went to Essex in order to investigate claims of the haunted Borley Church. The tales involved ghostly chanting, organ music being heard when no one can be seen playing, as well as the ghosts of both monks and nuns roaming around the area. It is said that these hauntings started because in one of the past lives of the area and the building, it is said that a nun was buried in the walls alive after attempting to run off with a monk. I gotta be honest, if that was me, I'd haunt that place for forever too. The Warrens are said to have made a series of visits to Borley, and in regards to their very first visit, Lorraine apparently said that it was a phenomenal experience. She spoke about how there was a reporter who was also there to cover the story, and this reporter was particularly skeptical about the reports. Suddenly, however, this reporter began feeling ill and was struggling to breathe. Later that night, after listening to a tape recording of the event, it is said that a disembodied female voice could be heard repeating the words, quote, "Hit him, hit him. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Lindley Street haunting. This is a case that the Warrens were involved in back in the 70s. A couple named Gerald and Laura Goodwin had adopted a girl named Marcia a few years prior to this case and the strange occurrences taking place. There were a bunch of weird things that started happening, including furniture moving, seemingly of its own accord, as well as a crucifix flying off the wall, again seemingly by some sort of invisible force. What really drew people into this case specifically and what made it so sensational was the number of people who had reputations of being reliable who also claimed to witness these strange occurrences. It is also said that some people claimed to even hear Marcia's pet cat speak. One reverend even claimed to see the cat singing Christmas carols in the basement, but let's be honest, while that would be jarring, that's also one of the funniest things I've ever heard in my life. In our number 4 spot today, we have the theater haunting. Starting in Willimantic, Connecticut, the Warrens went to check out a theater that was said to have a number of strange apparitions and weird sightings. The manager is said to have been 32 at the time, and he had recently started working there when he saw the figure of a woman late one night after he had already closed down the theater. He saw the same figure the following night, and this led him to confide in one of the employees who had been there for years about what he was witnessing. This is when the employee said that from the balcony one night he had seen 2 actors in a Shakespearean dress. One of them fell, exclaiming, "They've killed me," and then all 3 of them disappeared. This wasn't the only employee either. The janitor also experienced strange happenings and sometimes even heard footsteps. The Warrens decided to conduct a seance in the theater. Ed apparently reported that, quote, "The girl whom the manager had seen came to us and explained that she had been killed after she witnessed the killing of a man. The spirit said she knew she was dead, but she was afraid to, quote, pass over to death because they were, quote, waiting for her." There was of course a medium present at the seance, and it is said that this medium called upon spirit guides to help the girl, but she refused. The Warrens left this case saying that the girl's spirit was still earthbound and that she remained in that theater. I wonder if she's still there. Does anyone know? In our number 3 spot today, we have the Enfield Poltergeist. In 1977, the Warrens were called to Enfield, which is said to be a North London suburb, over reports of some poltergeist activity. Many people claimed that the reports of the hauntings were a hoax, but when the Warrens conducted their investigation, they became convinced that the hauntings were a result of demonic possession. The claims said that the house had furniture that moved on its own, there were disembodied voices being heard throughout the halls, and just general haunting things that nobody would ever want in their home. Over the course of 18 months, there were over 30 people that included neighbors, researchers, psychics, and journalists who all claimed to see heavy furniture moving totally on its own, and many even reported hearing the voices as well. In the end, this case was so famous, it actually went on to inspire the story that was seen in The Conjuring 2. In our number 2 spot today, we have the werewolf. Okay, I'll be honest, this is one of the more controversial Ed and Lorraine cases, but still we had to talk about it today. Ed and Lorraine claimed that they were able to exorcise the angry spirit of a werewolf from a man named Bill Ramsey, who was said to have turned into a sort of wolf man. The Warrens did not perform exorcisms themselves, so of course they needed to get some help from priests as well, but they claimed that the treatment worked. Lorraine explained that she saw Ramsey's case on TV and just felt like she could help him. She even claimed to have a video of this guy transforming into a wolf, but she conveniently never released it to the public, so that is still up for debate. The Warrens were so involved in this case that they brought Bill from England back to Connecticut in order to be exorcised by a bishop that they knew and trusted. In our number 1 spot today, we have Satan's Harvest. This Ed and Lorraine story is one that is said to be behind the book Satan's Harvest, and it involves someone named Maurice Therault, who was also known by the nickname Frenchie. He was a farmer, and it is said that he had 2 personalities. One was super kind and friendly and warm, his neighbors loved him, some members of his family loved him, but there was this other side of him that was dark and cruel and twisted, and this was seen towards only specific members of his family. Ed and Lorraine came to investigate, and it is said that absolute chaos ensued. They claimed to see him bleeding from his eyes, they found crosses that would just appear on his body, and even messages written on his back. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have The Conjuring. To start off this list today, of course, we have to talk about the case that really started a lot of our more modern interest in Ed and Lorraine cases, and that would be the Conjuring house. The house, which was built in 1736, wasn't anything special and didn't gain its fame until the family of Roger and Carolyn Perron moved in 1971. They claimed to experience terrible things like the smell of rotting flesh, witnessing something levitate in their beds as they slept, and one of the family members even claimed to have been possessed by a spirit. The family, of course, called Ed and Lorraine to come and investigate and hopefully help them out. Once there, the pair claimed that there was in fact a spirit haunting the home, and it was that of Bathsheba Sherman, who is said to have been a witch who previously lived in the house and who was buried in a cemetery nearby. The investigators had to make several trips to the house over the span of a few years, but as of now it is said that the house belongs to new owners who continue to open their doors to paranormal investigators. In our number 9 spot today we have Annabelle. Many of us are likely quite familiar with Annabelle due to the movies made about the haunted doll. As it turns out though, they truly are more than just movies, as the real story is said to have taken place in the 1960s. This is at least when Ed and Lorraine began to get involved with the doll. In 1968, two roommates claimed that the Raggedy Ann doll that was gifted to one of them by their mother had become possessed by the spirit of a young girl named Annabelle Higgins. After further investigation by the pair, the Warrens explained that the doll was being manipulated by an inhuman presence, and they knew that the roommates would not be able to keep the doll without fearing for their safety. This is what led to the pair taking the doll and placing it in their occult museum. In our number 8 spot today we have Amityville. One of the cases that is perhaps the most famous of Ed and Lorraine's is that of the Amityville haunting. In the 1970s, couple George and Kathy Lutz contacted the paranormal pair because they claimed that their house was haunted by some sort of violent demonic presence. They said that this presence was so intense it forced them to have to leave their home. Considering the dark history this home had just before the couple had moved in, it wasn't necessarily a stretch to believe that the house was haunted by some sort of evil spirit. In the end, the Warrens investigated the home and backed up claims that the Lutz had, which is part of the reason why this case ended up launching its own multi-million-dollar franchise afterwards. In our number 7 spot today we have the Enfield Poltergeist. In 1977, the Warrens were called to Enfield, which is said to be a North London suburb, over reports of some poltergeist activity. Many people claimed that the reports of the hauntings were a hoax, but when the Warrens conducted their investigations, they became convinced that the hauntings were a result of demonic possession. The claims said that the house had furniture that moved on its own, there were disembodied voices being heard throughout the halls, and just general haunting things that nobody would want in their home. In the end, this case was so famous it's actually what went on to inspire the story that was seen in The Conjuring 2. In our number 6 spot today we have The Devil Made Me Do It. This is the Ed and Lorraine Warren story that is behind the 2021 Conjuring movie. We've got a lot of fucking Conjuring movies on this list. In 1981, Arn Johnson was accused of taking the life of his landlord, Alan Bono. Ed and Lorraine had been called to the house prior to this taking place because the family believed that the younger brother of Arn's fiancée had been possessed by a demon, but when the paranormal investigations began, Ed and Lorraine claimed that Arn was also possessed by some sort of demon. The trial of Alan's killing ended up marking a point in time, as it was the first time demonic possession was used as a not guilty plea. In this case, it was unsuccessful, but it went on to be one of the most historic cases of Ed and Lorraine's. In our number 5 spot today we have the werewolf. Okay, I'll be honest, this is one of the more controversial Ed and Lorraine cases, but still, we had to talk about it. Ed and Lorraine claimed that they were able to exorcise the angry spirit of a werewolf from a man named Bill Ramsey, who is said to have turned into a sort of wolf man. The Warrens did not perform exorcisms themselves, so of course they needed to get some help from priests as well, but they claimed that the treatment worked. Lorraine explained that she saw Ramsey's case on TV and just felt like she could help him. She even claimed to have a video of this guy transforming into the werewolf creature, but conveniently never released it to the public. The Warrens were so involved in this case that they brought Bill from England back to Connecticut in order to be exorcised by a bishop that they knew and trusted. In our number 4 spot today we have the Union Cemetery. The Union Cemetery in Easton, Connecticut is known as one of the most haunted cemeteries in the United States, which definitely says a lot. The most famous of all of its hauntings is a presence that is often referred to as the White Lady. There are many people who have experienced this ghostly presence, and many people have seen her walking in front of their cars as they drive near the cemetery. That is all exactly why, in 1990, the Warrens decided to experience it for themselves when they set up their cameras in this haunted location. It is said that just after 2:40 a.m. they heard the sound of weeping, and a paranormal figure began to move several feet in their direction. It is said that as they witnessed this, Ed and tried to slowly approach her, but she suddenly vanished just as quickly as she had appeared. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Smurl house. In August of 1973, the Smurl family had moved into a new home in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, but things quickly took quite a dark turn. The family began to claim that their new home was possessed by some sort of a demon that caused loud noises and bad odors, and whatever this entity was, it was doing some really violent things to the family, as well as to their pet dog. This went on for years before they decided to call in the pros. Of course, Ed and Lorraine were on the case. According to Ed, there was a demon that inhabited the home, and it was very powerful. It had the ability to shake mirrors and other items of furniture, and they began trying to persuade it to leave by playing religious music and praying. Apparently, the Warrens, while in the home, witnessed a drop in temperature, which was followed by the formation of a sort of dark mass. There was another instance where they claimed they saw the demon leave a message on a mirror that read, "Get out." In our number 2 spot today, we have The Haunting in Connecticut. If you've ever seen or read The Haunting in Connecticut, this is a home and a story that you might be a little familiar with. In 1986, the Snedeker family moved into a new rental home that at one time had previously been a funeral home. In the basement, the family found some less than welcoming items that were left from the home's previous life. Shortly after moving in, however, their discoveries would become more gruesome as they began to have reports of evil coming from the house. These included attacks on the family members, seeing apparitions, and they even explained violent personality changes from one of the family members. When Ed and Lorraine investigated the house, they were able to confirm that it was in fact haunted. It is said that one of the most frightening things that took place in the house, aside from the rumors of possession, was one day when a family member was mopping the floor and all of a sudden the water suddenly turned blood red. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Donovan family. In the early 1970s, the Warrens were called to the home of the Donovan family, and when they arrived, they found them all terrified. They witnessed loud pounding and other inhuman noises coming from inside of the walls. The wallpaper was peeling and the water was running red. The Warrens began their investigation, and this included asking them questions to try and find out if there was a source for the haunting, such as a recently passed away family member or some kind of new secondhand item that they had inherited. Through this questioning, it was revealed that one member of the family had used a Ouija board and ended up contacting someone who said that they had died in the neighborhood 10 years earlier. The Warrens knew it was time for them to call a priest because they believed that the entity that had been reached through the Ouija board was actually a demon that was just posing as the person who had passed away. Following an exorcism, it is said that things in the home slowly returned to normal, but the events stayed with the entire family. One member who witnessed the hauntings and the exorcism said, quote, "I nor anyone else in my family have ever before witnessed anything so weird and terrifying."
Number 10. The White Lady of Union Cemetery. Located in Easton, Connecticut, the Union Cemetery is widely regarded as one of the most haunted cemeteries in the US. Built in the 1700s, it's the host to hundreds of grave sites, and allegedly some of the spirits of those buried there still linger around their plots. Chief among these is the White Lady, a woman with long dark hair wearing a white nightgown and a bonnet to match. Ed Warren visited here to investigate the various claims of paranormal activity, including the ghostly red eyes of a man burned to death across the street that peer at you from the bushes. He claimed he was able to catch the lady in white on film and to have attempted to dispel her spirit, but there have been many sightings since, including one where the ghostly figure dented a car that drove through her as she appeared. Amateur and professional investigators frequent the cemetery to find out anything they can about the restless spirits here. Number 9. South End Werewolf. 9-year-old Bill Ramsey was playing in his back garden when he felt a sudden chill wash over him, and he suddenly started smelling something foul. He reported that suddenly an intense rage entered his body and he was flooded with strength. He pulled a fence post out of the ground with the fence still attached and began to swing it around like a club. Now, I've put up a fence or two in my day and those posts are not anything close to light. So this 9-year-old has some major strength or something else fueling him. But it didn't stop there. He then began gnawing on the wire and growling. His parents were frightened and remained inside until he calmed down, and over the next 30 years, he only had a few incidents, nearly attacking his wife in his sleep, allegedly growing claws, and attacking and biting a friend while they were in a car. Over a year later, he went to the hospital after experiencing chest pains, where he suddenly bit a nurse, and patients report seeing him with a hunched back, growing claws from his hands, and having superhuman strength. He attacked multiple police officers and was tranquilized. Many more incidents like this occurred, and doctors ran every test they had but found no anomalies. So, Bill went to visit the Warrens, who performed an exorcism with the help of a bishop. during which he began to transform one last time before the demon was cast out. The Warrens even filmed this, and to this day, the case still baffles doctors and mental health professionals, as there have been no incidents since, but he has been inactive for this long before, so who knows. Number 8. The Lindley Street Haunting. This was indeed a haunting in Connecticut, but not that one. That comes later. Man, that state sure has a lot of famous ghost stories. In 1974, Gerard and Laura Gooden reported to the police that they had been under attack by some unseen forces that were lifting and throwing furniture, breaking windows, and even making their cat talk, or even sing, as one person recalls. The Warrens were called to investigate and found that the Goodens' adopted daughter Marcia may have had something to do with it, perhaps being possessed by a demon, as most of the unexplainable behavior started not soon after they brought her into their home for the first time. Banging from inside the walls and doors slamming were just the beginning. There were even multiple witnesses who verified all of these happenings, one of which tried to burn the house down to dispel the evils inside. Eventually, Marcia confessed to faking the strange activity herself and that it was all a hoax, which set the legal cases to rest. But no one could explain the crazy things that happened while Marcia was not in the house, or why things continued to move and float for a long time after everything was put to bed. And people still attempt to visit the house now to conduct paranormal investigations, though the current owners want nothing to do with that and do not wish to speak about their house's haunted history. Number 7. The Case of Arne Johnson. One of the many cases that has now become a feature film, the story of murder and possession is still hotly contested by legal scholars and paranormal investigators alike. More well known as The Devil Made Me Do It, the case sees the first time in United States legal history that a claim of demonic possession and denial of personal responsibility was used as a defense for a crime. A family member of Johnson's had recently had an exorcism performed on him by the Warrens, and during that ceremony, Arne taunted the demon that exited the boy and told it to enter him. Arne began to exhibit strange behaviors, including disassociating, growling, and claiming that the demon had forced him to drive his car into a tree. After a party at their new apartment with many people who lived and worked in the building, Johnson stabbed the building's landlord 20 times in the chest, leaving many wounds, including one that went from his stomach all the way up to his heart, and he died shortly after. Johnson maintains that he had no memory of the event at all, and in court argued that he had seen the demon in him many times before in reflections and claimed demonic possession as a defense. This is probably the main reason that this case is still so often thought of and is still being investigated. It was also the first unlawful killing in the history of this town of Brookfield, also in Connecticut. Go figure. Number 6. West Point. In October of 1972, the US Army was having the Warrens give a general lecture to the students at the military academy, but a few days before, the executive officer phoned them up and asked if they could come down early to investigate a security problem they were experiencing. The problem the officer called them about, a haunting at the superintendent's house, wasn't the only investigation they ended up undertaking. While they resolved the issue at the officer's home, the moving books and missing items were due to some spirits which were dispelled, causing no problems from then on. They caught wind from a few students that there was another haunted area on campus, room 4714. In the North Barracks, 2 cadets were asleep when suddenly a ghostly figure in a uniform from the 1830s wielding a musket appeared right in front of them. His stare and sheer presence made the boys freeze in fear, and then he disappeared. He was seen multiple times after that, but the Warrens did their work, and an exorcism was performed, and no one sleeps in that room anymore, though many students attempt to contact and look for the spirit that once resided here. Number 5. The Smurl House. In the 1970s, Jack and Janet Smurl purchased a new townhouse in Pennsylvania and moved in with their children. Soon after, as so often happens in these cases, strange things started happening. Items would go missing, voices would be heard when no one was near, knocking from inside walls, and even a chandelier falling and almost killing Janet. There were also reports of problems with electric devices, something paranormal experts attribute to demons and spirits affecting electromagnetic fields. The family called Ed and Lorraine after the church refused their request for help when claw marks appeared on the inside of their doors, and they arrived and collected video and audio recordings of the creepy events they saw take place and used the evidence to secure an exorcism, or 3 actually, none of which worked, the family says. They moved out in 1989 trying to escape the demons inside, and apparently they have, but paranormal experts still want to look into the house more to see what entities still reside there. Number 4. Satan's Harvest. A few of these stories have appeared in the movie universe that follows some of Ed and Lorraine's cases, and so they are well known, but sometimes the movie misses the mark. Maurice Theriault, also known as Frenchie, was a farmer in New England who grew up in a home, which only got more and more violent and sadistic as he grew older, being forced to watch and participate in horrible events. He asked for help from so many people, including God and Satan, really trying to cover his bases, but no one came to help. As he grew, he found himself knowing things he should have no knowledge of, being stronger than he had any right to be, and he began to hear voices. His father sabotaged his chance at finishing school and joining the army to keep him on the farm. Later on, the family started to notice strange things happening too. Frenchie would lose periods of time. Small fires would randomly appear around the property, and they began to hear voices from within the walls. You would follow Frenchie into a room only to turn the corner and have him not be there, but back where you both just came from. When the Warrens visited, they immediately sensed evil forces and began the process of an exorcism, which Frenchie wanted, but his body resisted. Upside down crosses appeared scratched into his body. He started bleeding from the forehead, and he randomly began to attack and strangle his wife while being exorcised. And the craziest part of all of this is that it was all caught on tape, leaving people the ability to watch and research the case on their own. Maurice appears as a character in a number of the Conjuring films, notably The Nun, though his story in the movies is not close to what really happened. Number 3, the Snedeker House. Here we go, back to Connecticut again, this time for the actual haunting in Connecticut. Wow, how many times can I say Connecticut in this video? Connecticut, Connecticut. In 1986, the Snedeker family moved into a simple home in Southington. Over time, they found more and more evidence that their house had once been a funeral home. They found blood drains, a gurney, toe tags, lots of spooky stuff. And soon they were reporting violent attacks, apparitions, and personality changes in their oldest son. The Warrens attributed this to a former mortician who regularly practiced necromancy, and those troubled demons were coming back to haunt the place they were never allowed to rest in. The movie shows some pretty harrowing scenes, which, according to the family, are close to what happened, though reports have come out of the son admitting to some of the behavior, and much of the rest was sensationalized. The subsequent owners of the house have had no issues since the exorcism, but horror aficionados still make the pilgrimage to see one of the most well-known haunted places for themselves. Number 2, Borley Rectory. After hearing about a string of spooky events at the Borley Church, including bells ringing without warning, sights of a headless monk leaving messages on the walls, and a ghostly nun walking the halls at night, which is where the inspiration for The Nun came from, the Warrens hired a crack team of paranormal photographers to investigate the site with them, and boy did they ever find something. In many photos, including on infrared film, they captured the ghost of a nun walking through the aisles and praying. Allegedly, the nun was burned alive in the walls of the convent after she had an affair with a monk, and walks the halls trying to repent for her sins. There's a lot of interesting stuff here, with the church having burned down in the 40s, countless reports of these apparitions. It's no wonder why people flock here to find something spooky for themselves. And finally, number 1, the Perron house. The tragedy of the Perron family is what the first Conjuring film was based on, so I'm sure many of you already know the story, but I'll give you the basics. Carolyn, Roger, and their 5 daughters moved into a farmhouse in Rhode Island in 1971, and immediately things started to go wrong, like so many other cases. The sound of scraping metal and objects appearing in different rooms, and then they started to notice the presence of spirits. Many members of the previous owner's family died in mysterious circumstances. Many drowned, some took their own lives, and others had their lives taken from them too soon. And these were just some of the spirits that haunted them. There was also the spirit of a witch here, Bathsheba, who killed their neighbor and cursed the land before hanging herself from a tree outside. She was apparently the most vengeful and violent, and caused injury and mental trauma to many of the family members. And a seance was performed by the Warrens to attempt to rid the house of her presence. This house is still standing, and in the past few years, many teams have gone out to the property and used technology to search the grounds for bodies buried there. There is a small cemetery not too far from the property where there is a headstone for Bathsheba, but they may find some other horrifying things on or under the property as they continue investigations and continue the Warrens' work.
Number 10, the Keg Mansion in Toronto. This one's for me. I'm so sorry. But here it is. Tell anyone in Toronto that you're going to the Keg Mansion for dinner. Be ready to receive the... You know it's haunted, right? Because they will do that. They will do that. Because it is. I have been there on several occasions, and I can verify that heading to the upstairs girls' bathroom alone is a harrowing journey. The haunting goes back all the way to 1915. Before it was the Keg, it was the home of industrialist Hart Massey and his family. Legend has it that the Massey's daughter Lillian passed away, and her maid was so distraught over her death that she took her own life. That's one theory. Others say that she committed the act to avoid the dread of her affair with Massey being revealed. Either way, the ghostly image of a maid hanging by the neck has been seen multiple times by employees
I have friends who work there, and guests alike. It's been a keg since the 1970s, and Ed and Lorraine never visited, neither for business or pleasure. There are either two reasons for this: they were too busy, or the idea of a ghostly apparition appearing mid-bite didn't sound very appealing to them. How do you like your spirit? Rare or well done? Number 9. The Myrtles Plantation. This 18th century plantation, along with a 600-acre land, carries with it a dark past. Perhaps it's due to the fact that no one was living in it as to why the Warrens never visited, but the haunting itself is pretty terrifying. Though only one person was confirmed to have been killed on the property, with the history of slavery surrounding the estate, the number is estimated to be a lot higher, as we can probably guess. One of the most famous ghosts who reportedly walks the ground is that of Chloe. Chloe was a slave who poisoned the birthday cake of the daughters of Clark Woodruff to take a small kind of revenge on her awful masters. She apparently didn't intend for the girls to die, only to fall ill, but alas, they died. When they did, her fellow slaves were so fearful of Woodruff finding out that they hung Chloe for her crimes. This tale has fluctuated over the years, but the verified murder was that of William Drew Winter, who was shot on his porch and reportedly crawled back into the house, climbed to the 17th step on the stairs in time to die in the arms of his love. Both tales have sparked sightings of spirits on the ground, and in Winter's case, visitors reportedly see and hear bloody footprints crawl to the 17th step and then stop. Had the Warrens visited the property, they could have potentially confirmed what spirits remain restless on the property, but alas, we will never know. Number 8. Villisca Axe House. Adding to this list of properties that make you want to run away is the Villisca Axe House. The story goes as follows. On June 10, 1912, Josiah and Sarah Moore, along with their children, were bludgeoned to death inside their home, but no one knows who did it. It is one of America's most infamous cold cases, and the home remains preserved exactly as it was, except for the bodies, obviously, though many report that their spirits remain. The Warrens never charged for their work. They simply liked helping people because go Warrens. But the people who now run the Haunted Museum have no problem charging their visitors. The house remains a tourist attraction and there's a steep price to pay should you wish to stay the night. Besides the $400 fee, it may cost you your life. Allegedly in 2014, a paranormal reporter stayed at the house, and at 12:45 in the morning, the owners got the call. The man was found covered in stab wounds, which authorities later reported were self-inflicted. The Warrens risked their well-being all the time. So my theory is that the investors were the ones that kept them away because they didn't want to scare the ghosts away because they were making them so much money, but you know, it would have been nice to hear their thoughts. Number 7. Los Feliz Mansion. Have you ever entered a room or building that immediately gave you like the heebie-jeebies, like something in your gut was screaming at you that you weren't supposed to be there? Well, that is the exact feeling people encounter when they stand outside this mansion. On the night of December 6, 1959, Dr. Harold Perelson snapped and took the life of his wife and eldest daughter before he took his own. His two youngest managed to escape after their eldest sister screamed. He was a successful doctor with a happy family life, so no one knew why this happened. Some blame financial issues after one of his investments failed, but one creepy factor was that a passage from Dante's Divine Comedy was left open on his bedside table like a note. Ever since the event, people report an overwhelming feeling of foreboding that prevents visitors from entering. It was used as a storage unit by a family who purchased it 2 years after the event, but it was never lived in again. Number 6. The Jean Harlow Haunting. It sounds like bad luck followed all those who lived in this home. You may have heard of old Hollywood actress Jean Harlow and her horrendously abusive husband, Paul Byrne. In 1932, Byrne took his own life while standing in front of a mirror, though some believe foul play since the butler who found him called MGM Studios first, not the police. Byrne's ex-girlfriend jumped off a boat to her death days later, so there was some speculation if it was her. Jean moved out, but died later at the ripe age of 26, super young. So as you can tell, that house did not have good vibes. But then, in 1963, Jay Sebring bought the house with his then-girlfriend, Sharon Tate. Tate in a couple interviews recounted events in the house that creeped her out, such as the appearance of a short man, probably Byrne, staring at her in the master bedroom. She also saw a shadowy figure hanging with a slit throat in the hallway. Creepier still, Tate and Sebring would later fall victim to the horrendous and horrific Charles Manson massacres. Tate was the same age as Harlow when she died, also a really creepy coincidence. Something dark clung to whoever lived in the house and is still presumed to be haunted to this day. Number 5. 455 Sackett Street. When you think of a haunted house, a specific image appears in your brain. It's either a farmhouse or a mansion, there's really no in between. But you would think we would hear more about haunted apartment buildings since there is a large turnover, which is perhaps why the haunting of 455 Sackett Street didn't get as much attention. This place was riddled with unexplained fires, ominous feelings and sudden drops in temperature, and family tragedies. Everyone who lived there experienced dark things. What with the history of the building being riddled with insidious affairs, mob hits and dealings, and grim attacks, bound to happen. Jane, one of the women who lived there, once had a friend see a little boy in burnt rags staring at her. This event proved even more terrifying as after the woman moved out, the apartment was renovated. Within the walls of her apartment, they found a corpse fitting the above description, tucked inside the walls. So if you are ever in Brooklyn, don't request an in-person viewing. The Warrens never did. Number 4. Hotel Monte Vista. We all know the idea of a place being haunted is enough to lure in guests, but if guests can't even make it through the night, then there's a problem. And they needed the Warrens, but they never showed up. The Hotel Monte Vista opened as a community hotel in 1927, and soon a history of opium dens, tragic affairs, mob dealings once again, and secret gambling swelled around the place, as did their paranormal reputation. The hotel has become known for its ghostly sightings, such as in room 220. A long-term boarder had a strange habit of hanging meat from the ceiling in that room. I don't know why the hotel let them do that. And the lodger himself was found dead 3 days after his death. The TV allegedly changes channels on its own, and the sheets have been found torn to shreds. In room 210, the small voice of a bellboy announcing room service can be heard, though no one appears. John Wayne even experienced this. In room 306, the corpses of 2 women of the night were thrown over the balcony. Guests who stay there report feelings of being suffocated by hands while they sleep. Staff are plagued by sounds of infants crying in the basement and have been seen running to escape the sound. The list goes on and on. Perhaps it was more the money machine that kept the Warrens away, but it would have been cool to hear their take on the hauntings. Number 3. Poveglia Island. There are many reasons why the Warrens never visited this island, the number one being that it's so freaking terrifying it's actually illegal to visit. It's also in Italy, though they traveled all the time, so what's the reason? Poveglia Island plays host to over 160,000 violent deaths, from being a hospice for victims during the bubonic plague, then an asylum run by a mad doctor. The tormented past of the island has no limits. The story of the doctor on the island is the most menacing though. He performed cruel and malicious experiments on his patients, but their souls took revenge on him and allegedly drove him mad. So mad that he tried to throw himself off of the clock tower. And witnesses say that on the night it happened, a mysterious mist consumed the island. Those who decide to take a boat and venture as close as possible to it report hearing screams and moans that chill the bones. Even creepier, people report hearing a bell toll from across the bay, even though it was removed years before. Scientists who have studied the strange happenings of Poveglia have identified an electromagnetic field that surrounds the property, but there's no electricity to the island, so what's the reason? Number 2. The Dandy House. This may have been a job too big for the dynamic duo. A dream home turned nightmare, the Dandys experienced some of the most terrifying encounters since the Bell Witch. I said it. Clara and Phil Dandy lived in this house along with their kids in the 1970s and endured all kinds of encounters, from disembodied voices to footsteps racing around the house. It's a wonder they stayed as long as they did. The creepiest thing I saw described is that once they witnessed strange faces watching them through the windows. When Mr. Dandy ran outside to confront them, first of all, brave dude, badass, mad respect, the faces were looking out at him from inside the house. From there things got worse. Some of the things even sounded like aliens. They saw floating white specters and half animal, half human creatures watching them. Objects flew around the room, one lamp barely missed one of their daughters. They involved clergy and Ed and Lorraine to help clear the house, but even they couldn't rid the house of whatever possessed it. In fact, whatever they did made it worse. It got so bad, the Dandys ended up leaving the house after nothing worked. And last but not least, the Mothman in number 1. The legend of the Mothman, alien, angel, or demon. Described as a tall half-man, half-bird-like creature with glowing eyes, the Mothman even has skeptics unsure of what to say. The most famous groupings of sightings occurred between November 15th, 1966 to December 15th in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Prophetic in nature, sightings of the creature are often followed by tragic events, such as the Silver Bridge disaster. The aforementioned bridge collapsed on December 15th, 15th, which coincided with the last sighting of the creature. 46 people passed away, and because sightings ceased after this, people believe he was an angel of death of sorts. More recently, sightings of the Mothman started taking place in 2011 in Chicago. I know the Warrens strictly dealt with demons and possession, but considering how mystifying this whole event was, it would have been interesting to hear what they had to say. Number 10. The Devil Made Me Do It. In 1981, 19-year-old Arne Cheyenne Johnson sparked controversy far and wide for a crime he wasn't behind, or so we think. While arguing with Alan Bono over Johnson's girlfriend, Arne stabbed Bono, resulting in the man's death. When police arrived, Arne claimed that the devil made him do it. When the words "the devil made me do it" came from his mouth, it sent the world into controversy. Apparently, Arne was possessed by a demon that had not been vanquished by the Warrens at all. Ed and Lorraine had worked with his family a year prior when Arne's girlfriend's brother David was possessed by not one, not two, but 43 demons. In order to save him, Arne commanded the demons to enter him instead, so when his dark deed finally occurred, Ed and Lorraine flew to his defense. The Warrens stated that at the time of the exorcism, and I quote, "Johnson leapt up and cried to the demon, 'Come into me, I'll fight you, come into me.' But from that time on, he was possessed." The Paranormal Society was split in half, but Johnson's team was committed. The court had defended acts of God in the past, like a lightning strike to a tree hits a car, you know what I mean? And now it was time to defend accounts of the devil. But despite what you believe, it wasn't enough, and Johnson received a maximum sentence but was released after good behavior just 4 years later. But still, the fact that these demons were never truly vanquished left the Warrens terrified that this might be the case elsewhere. Number 9. The Smurl Haunting. Jack and Janet Smurl sound like they should be like the leading couple of a comedy featuring Jennifer Aniston and Jason Sudeikis. But of course, wrong list. The plight of the couple attracted the attention of Ed and Lorraine Warren after a series of dark and ominous events struck, of course. In the 1970s, the family started experiencing shocking technical mishaps like their TV bursting into flames and toilets flushing by themselves. I know, do ghosts poop? Apparently. At first, they didn't think anything of it, but then the knocking started, in a peculiar pattern of 3 followed by terrible sudden odors, making the Smurls feel ill. The strange noises and smells were swiftly followed by sightings, and thus entered the Warrens. The Warrens discovered a presence of 3 separate demons, and despite 3 exorcisms, the family reported the return of the demons until finally they let go 15 years later. Number 8. The Haunting in Connecticut. The mortuary turned home for the Snedeker family in Southington, Connecticut definitely created the perfect breeding grounds for a scary story, one that left even the Warrens uneasy in their skin. First off, moving into a mortuary? No thank you. In the 1980s, the Warrens took on the case of Carmen and Al Snedeker, who were being tormented by a series of restless spirits and demons. So in this case, it's not just one, but many that they feared. The family reported the smell of rotted flesh lingering in the house because, I don't know, it was a mortuary, and that the taps would turn red out of nowhere. The eldest son was plagued by visions of ghosts, and both Carmen and Al reported being sodomized by the ghosts. It's a very specific activity. Which led to the Warrens making the discovery that whoever the morticians were, their activities were not always professional, if you get my drift. I don't know what's worse, the demons themselves or like the people who used to live there. Ugh, can't handle that. This was one of their most confusing cases and remains under scrutiny to this day, but the Warrens knew whatever it was had to be exorcised. But the question is, was it really, or is it just hiding out until someone else comes along? Number 7. The Enfield Haunting. I don't know what it is with the 70s, man. It just seems like so much weird stuff happened. We had serial killers. It's nuts. But it just seems like it's one of the strangest times in history, what with violent killers and violent hauntings. The Enfield haunting took place in Brimstown, England, and remains one of the more boggling cases the Warrens worked on. Peggy Hodgson and her family claimed to have seen furniture and toys being thrown and moved by unknown forces in their homes. They even claimed that violent voices were heard and that their children were levitating in the air. They caught the photo of the girls levitating when the investigators set up a wired control camera into the room, which periodically periodically caught images throughout the night. Whatever it was, the Warrens knew there was a demonic entity within the house and immediately set to work. Number 6. The Perron family case. The Perron family lived in the old Arnold estate, which inspired the scariest film I have ever seen personally, because if you've watched me on Central Dark, you know how low my tolerance is. But anyway, it's still awful. Yeah, you know it, you've heard of it. 8 generations of families lived and died in the old house and apparently never wanted to leave, or never could. When the Perron family moved in the 1970s, the advice they got was to leave the lights on always. Why didn't you leave then? I don't know. I don't know how that didn't send them running for the hills. The house had been rife with tragedy, but one of the 3 people who took their own lives was an alleged Satanist whose activity was responsible for the possession of the house. Her name was Bathsheba Sherman, who became a demon that Lorraine will never forget. The demon would physically attack the daughters of the Perron family, with one reportedly seeing a floating head screaming and retching at her. Ugh, I almost didn't say her name, but I did, so we'll see what happens to me now. Number 5. The Shadow Doll. The Shadow Doll is literally the doll of your nightmares. The Shadow Doll comes from unknown origins but was kept in the Warrens Museum for safekeeping. But what we do know was that it was used for satanic rituals, and that the thing is doused in black magic and contains human and animal bones. Whatever possesses this thing had the Warrens take it into their possession to ensure that it caused harm to no one else. Legend has it that if you take a picture of the doll, it will possess your nightmares. But it won't just be any nightmare. It will be the most terrifying you've ever experienced, and some have even suffered heart attacks from them. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't they just burn the thing? Well, what's more dangerous? A demon you can see right in front of you, or one for you to wander wherever it chooses? Honestly, I take the spider approach with this. If you see the spider, you know where the spider is, you're good. As soon as the spider disappears, burn your house down. Number 4. Valak. This one is a little controversial because was it just made up for the films? We don't know. Valak is a real demon mentioned in the Lesser Key of Solomon that was introduced into the Conjuring series of films. Though her direct involvement with Lorraine and Ed is under debate, Lorraine's belief in the demon was very strong. Valak is referred to as the Great President of Hell, and usually chooses to appear as a small winged, 2-headed creature thing resembling a child. Valak is said to command 30 legions of demons, and in the film became the leading arch nemesis of the Warrens. We'll mention Borley Church in a second, but Valak was portrayed as a nun. But there is some speculation that says that they may have actually encountered him throughout some of their worst cases. Lorraine often said that she encountered a black, shadowy vision of a dark entity whenever she wasn't working on a case, and believed that she was being followed by something she couldn't explain. Want to know more? Stay tuned until the end of the video and make sure to like and subscribe while we're here. Number 3. Borley Church relates to Valak. We'll talk about this in a second. The grim history of Borley Church is the perfect setting for a horror film. The land upon which it is built used to be the home to a 14th century monastery, where a monk fell in love with a nun at a nearby convent, which led to the monk being hanged, and the nun was bricked up alive within the walls of her convent, which sounds pretty friggin' extreme if you ask me. It sounds like evil resided there long before Ed and Lorraine made the trek out to sort out whatever demon lay between its walls. Whoever did that to those 2 poor people, ugh, that's awful. This case inspired the famous nun apparition, as I mentioned, as the youngest daughter of the family who settled there reported seeing her figure. She was also pushed and slapped hard enough to leave welts behind, and that was just in the 1800s. When Ed and Lorraine visited, they obtained photo evidence of the hauntings. Ed captured the image of a monk leafing through one of the books at the altar, and Lorraine experienced a black entity rush past her. Valak. She remembered feeling an overwhelming sense of evil. A picture revealed later showed that the shadow of a nun was rushing past her, so that's where the image came from. So was it Valak? We don't know. Number 2. The Annabelle doll. You knew. Probably the most famous of the hauntings conquered by the Warrens was the Annabelle doll. It would almost be a crime not to mention it. Dolls are already eerie with their black, piercing, beady eyes that look like there's nothing there. But in this case, the most terrifying part was the thing behind it. The case dates back to the 1970s when a Raggedy Ann doll was innocently purchased from an antique store for her daughter. Soon the doll began raising alarm when it would change positions in the house, boggling its owners. But when the notes started showing up saying help me and help Lou, then they came home to find it covered in blood, and they decided then that they needed to call a professional. The first medium they called in said it was just the spirit of a girl who passed away, but then the owner, Angie's boyfriend, was attacked. Enter the Warrens. They knew the doll was in fact a demon based on the marks of the beast and other encounters. They removed the doll and took it home, vowing not to take the highway, concerned that whatever was within the doll might cause an accident. Indeed, their brakes stalled or failed several times on their way home, putting their life in jeopardy several times. It wasn't until Ed doused the doll in holy water that the problem desisted. The couple was so concerned about the doll that Ed routinely said a prayer over the doll every single night. Alright, number 1, the Amityville horror case. The setting: Amityville, Long Island in 1975. A place rife with satanic manifestations set on driving whoever entered to violent madness. As soon as I even say Amityville, you know where this is going. One of the most famous Warren cases, this haunting continues to land on the conclusion that there are just some things that can't be explained. A year before the Lutzes moved into the suburban home in Long Island, Ronald DeFay Jr. shot and killed the 6 members of his family. So it's no wonder that during the first month of living there, the Lutzes experienced swarms of flies, loud banging noises, disturbing entities, and even levitations. The Lutzes moved out and left all their belongings behind, and George Lutz, the father, an ex-Marine and karate expert, so clearly a tough guy, wouldn't even meet the Warrens at the house. He met them at a Pizza Hut. He was that scared. The Warrens said that this case affected their personal relationship to each other the most out of any case they've worked on. This entity followed the Warrens home the very first day, and Lorraine described being incredibly fearful. There was something she just couldn't explain. To this day, Lorraine says that this is the case that haunts her the most, and said, and I quote, she hoped that this was as close to hell as she would ever get.
It's coming in at number 10, let's just get it out of the way, we have Annabelle. Okay, so we all know that Annabelle the doll resides in the occult museum, so let's just honestly get her out of the way and move on. Annabelle is a Raggedy Ann doll that lives in a glass box because she simply can't be trusted to be unsheathed to the real world. The doll is demonically possessed by a dead child named Annabelle. Hip hip hooray. The doll has portrayed some horrifying and very evil behaviour, and the Warrens were given the doll by a student nurse who simply couldn't handle having her around anymore. Annabelle the doll was the inspiration behind the scary movies The Conjuring and Annabelle Creations, so a pretty scary plushie. Visitors at the museum are warned profusely not to even touch the glass cage that the creepy old smiling Annabelle sits in. You don't want to find out what kind of malevolence she could unleash if you break the rules. Moving on to number 9, we have a vampire coffin. It seems that the vampire coffin on display in the occult museum was found by the Warrens themselves and was used by a real-life modern-day vampire. But was it though? Let's take a look at it, shall we? I mean, there really is rather a lot going on here. There's a window with a creepy doll head on a plinth. Apparently the plinth is important. There's some kind of mounted devil head too, a spooky necklace, and a picture of the alleged vampire in question. And like, what is happening at the top there? Also, is the vampire who this belongs to pissed that his bed's been stolen? Like, I would be. Is he gonna come looking for it? So many questions. Coming into number 8, we have child gravestones. Okay, but like, actually what is wrong with the Warrens? I get it, occult museum and everything, but do we not draw the line at tombstones of children? Apparently, we do not. These wee little graves can actually be found outside the main museum, you know, just to like create a more total experience in the walk up to the building. It is said that the graves on display belong to children who were used in ritual sacrifice for satanic spells. Coming into number 7, we have the 2 deaf dolls. These dolls are a little bit different from Annabelle, as they are said to be voodoo dolls or witch dolls. Sure, they look creepy. I mean, one of them has a noose around its head for goodness sake. The other one has had its eyes gouged out, which isn't better by any means. The story behind them is even creepier, because you see, voodoo dolls are used to bring real harm to real people. The noose on the neck of one of the dolls probably indicates that someone died, and gouged out eyes, well, that isn't a great sign either. It seems that a doll collector came across these dolls and brought them home. I would leave them very much where they were. On bringing them home, she found that her son's health began deteriorating rapidly. Now it seems that some of the witch's voodoo doll magic had retained and picked the boy as its new vessel. The collector contacted the Warrens, who removed the dolls, after which the boy recovered. But the story continues. It seems that a visitor to the museum broke the rules and touched one of the dolls and was later involved in a horrifying accident. This is what happens when you touch the creepy dolls. Coming into number 6, we have shrunken heads. Okay, do you know what shrunken heads are? Because if you don't, let me break it to you. They are the real decapitated corpse heads of dead people that have been prepared as tribal trophies. Sounds great. To make a shrunken head, you have to remove the skull meticulously, and then you sew the eyes and mouth and nose shut. All of the brain matter and fat from the head is also removed. A ball is stuffed in the head to keep the shape, and then the head is boiled with water-containing tannins. Ugh. Head soup. No. The head is then dried with hot rocks and buried in sand, usually for a year. Great. So in the Occult Museum there are real decapitated heads, and these ones have been used for tribal magic rituals. There is some seriously bad juju associated with some of these heads. Coming into number 5, we have the summoning mirror. A classic haunted mirror. Mirrors have long been associated with the spirit world. Indeed, legends like Candyman and Bloody Mary seem to suggest that spirits can be summoned from paranormal planes using a mirror. This isn't just any mirror at the Occult Museum. Of course it isn't. This is a special conjuring mirror used to bring forth spirits and demons. The only thing is though, you don't know if what answers your call will be a good spirit or a bad spirit. To me, I have to say the mirror is pretty beautiful and lavish, like I'd like that in my bedroom, although maybe without the side of spirits popping up. They can stay out. Coming into number 4, we have the haunted organ. Who this organ belongs to, we simply don't know, but according to the Occult Museum, it starts playing itself at random intervals. Ooh. It is thought that the organ is haunted by a particularly musical spirit, and that the instrument provides a macabre soundtrack to the witching hour at the museum. On top of the organ sits all kinds of other creepy stuff, a sign which reads "Restless Spirit", a hand holding a small ball, a bust of a child, a big frog, a selection of spooky owls. Honestly, wonder how the organ feels about all the clutter. Marie Kondo needs to get in, sort it out. Coming into number 3, we have a brick from the most haunted house in England. The story of the Borley Rectory is actually pretty chilling. The building was constructed in 1862 in Victorian times in Essex, and rumours of its haunting were rife from the very beginning. The building was severely damaged by a fire in 1939. Ghost hunters claim the activity is related to a Benedictine monastery built in the area in 1362. A monk was said to have been executed, and a nun bricked alive in the walls of the convent after the pair had an affair. It is thought that the nun and the monk haunt the grounds and had a hand in the fire that tore through the rectory building on the site. Before the fire, it was said the owners of the house had found human bones on the property and experienced poltergeist activity. Despite the fire rendering the building inhabitable, hauntings in the ruins continue. Now of course good old Ed and Lorraine had to go for a jaunt there, and they took a token back to the museum with them, a brick from the ruins. Was it one of the bricks that was used to keep the nun in the wall? Does it carry any of the bad energy from its horrible history? Possibly. Coming into number 2, we have the Wood Dweller. Ugh, the story behind this object honestly fills me with fear. So the story goes that the satanic idol was found in the woods by a guy who was out hunting. The man said that he walked up to the doll and had a horrible feeling. Honestly, that's terrifying. It scared a grown man, a huntsman. All of his energy was just drained, and he said he was filled with dread. Ugh. He said he turned away from the idol, and then he saw a man wearing a black cloak walking in step opposite to him. It seemed that the horned idol is used for satanic rituals for summoning evil spirits. The man did make his way out of the forest and told the Warrens about the idol. Of course, Ed and Lorraine went to seek it. Lorraine Warren was particularly affected by the piece and said that one of the demonic spirits inside the idol sent her into a catatonic state for days. She even claimed it made her levitate. Does this sound like something should be on display to the public? To me, no. Put it away. Okay, this needs to be put away. It freaked me out harder than Annabelle, and I don't know who's gonna make a movie about this, but they should. We have the heart-stopping shadow doll at number 1. Let's have a look at this shadow doll, shall we? Honestly, my eyes. take it away. This doll is said to have been created by black magic and is comprised of human and animal bones. Hip hip hurrah. The life-size doll is labelled as a doll of shadows and hexes, and if you ever visit the museum, you should be careful not to look the doll in the eye, for it seems that it has the ability to visit you in your nightmares, giving you a fright so hard you could have a heart attack. Apparently, even so much as photographing this doll could expose you to its hex, so be careful. The Warrens say that the doll was given to them by a couple who found it in an antique store. I know, right? Who wouldn't look at this doll and think, what a beautiful vintage piece worth taking home? Obviously, just ignoring the warning signs of the doll's demonic fashion sense and the soul-sucky open mouth and the gormless eyes. Yep, the couple took it home and began experiencing terrible sleep paralysis and nightmares, and at this point, I'm thinking, who do they have to blame but themselves? The husband even woke up with scratches on his back. Who do you gift a horrible demonic doll to? The Warrens, of course.
Coming in number 10, we have Orange Cheyenne Johnson. Not everything that the Warrens were involved in had to do with them going into a house to try and kick some spiritual butt. I mean, this case started like that, but then it turned into one of the most famous court cases of all time. Orange Cheyenne Johnson had the Warrens come to his home to help a young boy who was apparently possessed by a demon. The Warrens were successful in ripping the demons out of this boy's body, which there were apparently 40 of. But something went wrong. The demons left the boy's body, but then moved over to Orange Cheyenne Johnson's body. Can we just address a couple of things here? First, how many demons can fit into one body? This dude had a house party living inside of him, and that turned him completely evil. But what if you just had like 1 or 2 demons inside of you? Could you just keep living as a normal person, but you would just feel dehydrated sometimes? Like, what's the deal on that? And you think the Warrens would be better at their job and know to not let the demons move from one body into another body. But back to my story of Mr. Johnson. These demons started to drive him crazy, and then one day he snapped and attacked his landlord. He stabbed him multiple times, which led to his death. Johnson was arrested, and during the trial he used the defense of being possessed, where the Warrens actually came in to speak on the matter, since they kinda were the reason that the demons were in his body. Now, even though these demons were floating around in him, apparently he was still sent to prison, which I think is the right thing to do. Next on the list, guys, we have the Perron family. This is a very disturbing case that is one of the most famous that the Warrens investigated. If you have seen the movie The Conjuring, then you'll have an idea of what went on here. This is the case the movie was based on. And to be fair, the real case is actually even scarier. This was when the Perron family moved into a home back in 1971. They were probably happy to have a house that was such a steal, but all that happiness would go away when they found out what was going on within the walls. Turns out the whole place was infested with ghosts. At first it seemed like nothing too big. There were small items that would go missing and dirt that would show up in rooms. Then things started to get more intense. Their beds would float and people started to see ghosts walk through the halls. The Perron family started to look into what was going on in this home, and they found out that many people had died on the property. A lot of them had taken their own life, and there were even people who had hung themselves, or even creepier, some people had drowned themselves behind the house in a river. The Warrens came through and were able to perform an exorcism to clean up the house, and the Perrons eventually stopped having ghostly troubles. Next on the list, guys, we have the White Lady of Union Cemetery. The Union Cemetery is one of the most famously haunted places in America. This has been a hotspot for ghosts since the 1700s. Now, the Warrens weren't the first to come in and investigate this place for being packed with ghosts, but they did some pretty intense experiments to try and confirm their beliefs that ghosts were haunting the area. Ed went in there and spent 7 nights in the cemetery. That's like one of those questions where someone's like, what would you do for $1 million? Would you spend 7 nights in a cemetery? But this dude was doing it just for poops and giggles. I'm not going anywhere near that thing unless I'm getting at least 10K. But Ed did get exactly what he was looking for. During one of his nights in the cemetery, he saw a figure of a woman who was crying and walking towards him, but shadow figures came out and stopped her from reaching Ed. He snapped a picture that looked like a big white blob, but he claims that this was the White Lady using her electromagnetic energy to grab his attention. Next on the list, we have the Bowley Church hauntings. The Warrens better be racking up a lot of money for all the movies that were made about their adventures. I hope that I live such a wild life that when I get old, people make movies about what I did. Now, if you have seen the movie The Nun, then you will know the backbone of this story. I don't think I need to state that the movies exaggerate what happened in real life, but this did take place at a church. There were reports of some creepy things happening. There was a headless ghost that would be seen walking around the church that people thought was a monk. There was the ghost of a dead nun that was seen walking walking around as well. Apparently, there was a body found of a nun in the walls of the church. It's thought that she could have been buried alive for having an affair with one of the monks. Damn, dude. They really didn't take stuff lightly back then. Next on the list, we have Bill Ramsey. Now, out of all the ones on this list, it would seem that this one would be probably the coolest. From the time Bill Ramsey was a kid, he had some pretty crazy things going on. He was insanely strong, and he would sometimes act like an animal. Maybe he was just a weird kid, and no one really cared because eventually he started acting normal. That's until he was a grown man. He started to crave blood and would wake up in the middle of the night panting like an animal. Eventually, he has to be locked up for the protection of the people around him when he started to attack people, and it took 6 cops to take him down. The Warrens came in and performed an exorcism, and after that, he was as right as rain. Next on this, guys, we have the Smller family. It would seem that you couldn't move into a new home in the 70s or 80s without having something to do with ghosts inside of it already. Well, the Warrens were hot on the trail of this one after the Smller family was attacked by several ghosts in their home. People were pushed down the stairs, the dog was thrown against the wall, items in the home were broken, and even things that were too graphic for this channel happened. The Warrens came in and pushed the ghosts out, and while doing so, they saw a dark being appear out of the floor and float up to the ceiling. Next on the list, guys, we have the Enfield Poltergeist. Not every case with the Warrens turned into them being the masters of the spectral realm. Sometimes people wanted nothing to do with them. There was the case of the Enfield Poltergeist, where there was apparently a kid who had a ghost living inside of him. Now, there were a bunch of reports saying that this kid was just making this up, but this didn't stop the Warrens from investigating. They heard word of a ghost and they wanted to get to the bottom of it. But when they showed up, they didn't even tell the family that they were coming. They thought they were famous enough to just be allowed to walk around any rumor of a ghost. I think the clout was getting to their head a little bit. But what ended up happening was the family didn't even let them into the house. The family talked to them for a little bit, but that's about as far as they got in terms of removing a ghost from a child. Next on the list, guys, we have the haunting in Connecticut. If I move into a new place, one of the first things I'm going to ask is if there has ever been a dead body in the house. It would seem that most ghost problems come from a slew of corpses hanging out in the basement at one time or another, and that's exactly what we have here. It was Carmen and Al Snydecker that needed to move into a new home so they could be closer to the hospital. See, their son was very sick and they wanted to be able to rush over at a moment's notice. Because of their desperation, they moved into a home that used to be a mortuary. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of ghost activity hanging around in the home. The family saw a ton of spectral activity. There was dead bodies that would rise out of the ground, blood would come out of the tap, spirits would walk down the hall. Now, there has been a ton of evidence to disprove a lot of the stuff the Warrens have said about the home, but I would like to add on the craziest thing that they said was causing the haunting. The Warrens claimed that the spirits who haunt the home were angry because the people who used to work in the morgue would have sex with the dead bodies. Yeah, I didn't know ghosts cared that much about what happened to their bodies after they died. And also, how do you get those kind of details from a ghost? It's additions like that that make you question whether or not the Warrens were actually telling the truth. Alright guys, next we have the Annabelle doll. This has to be one of the most famous cases the Warrens have ever investigated thanks to the Annabelle movies. Now, the movies spruced her up a little bit, having her looking like an old Victorian doll, but she was actually a Raggedy Ann doll, which makes her much less menacing. But the stories surrounding this haunting figure are still pretty terrifying. The Annabelle doll was owned by a nurse back in the 70s who thought that it was just a cute little thing until it started to wake her up in the middle of the night with the sounds of crying and dreams of her being strangled by the doll. Yeah, at this point she should have burned it. But the girl got in contact with the Warrens and found out that the doll was possessed by a demonic spirit. So what was the best course of action? Burn the doll, maybe? Nope, instead put in a glass case on display in the Warrens Museum. Don't worry, they made sure that the case was blessed by holy water. And next on the list, guys, we have the Amityville Horror House. There has been movie after movie of this horror house, and even if you don't believe in ghosts, you have to admit that everything that went down in this house was pretty nuts. So the story starts with Ronald J. Defoe. This dude lived in the house with his family and then one day just snapped. He took a rifle and killed his whole family. That is insane and terrifying, but maybe the dude just went crazy and had nothing to do with ghosts. But then the Lutz family moved in and they said that a ton of horrific things happened while they were living in the house. They saw ghosts, they smelt rotting bodies, eyes would appear in rooms, their daughter would talk to an imaginary friend named Jody, and everyone in the family was constantly getting into fights. The family only lasted a month in the house before they fled because they were worried about ripping the family apart. After all this, the Warrens came in and they said that there was a demonic being in the house, and Lorraine saw bodies laid out on the floor through her psychic powers. And then they found out that back in the 1900s, someone used the house to practice black magic.